I spent exactly $50 to buy an entire abandoned town. But the first thing that greeted me was the body of an Apache girl hanging at the gate. And it didn't end there. She was not an ordinary human being. Welcome to Wild West storytelling. Let's begin. Dawn had just broken, casting the first light of day over a sea of dry golden grass, spilling down onto the row of weather-beaten wooden buildings that leaned like forgotten gravestones. Boone Carter, a cattleman used to living alone, pulled his horse to a stop at the rotted signpost that faintly read Red Hollow. This ghost town was now his, bought from the county for exactly $50 a deal, so cheap he almost felt like he'd stolen from the government. But as Boone's horse stepped slowly into the square, his breath caught at the sight before him. A young native girl, hanging from a rope. The morning wind tugged at the noose that dangled from the crossbeam in the middle of the square, and beneath it, an Apache girl's slender body swayed gently with the breeze. Eyes closed tight, Boone vaulted from the saddle, his boots kicking up red dust. In an instant, all thoughts of surveying his new property vanished. He yanked his Bowie knife free and rushed forward, slicing the rope. The girl's body collapsed into his arm so light it startled him. A faint, broken breath escaped her cold, purpled lips. "Come on, don't die here," Boone muttered, kneeling to lay her on the cold ground as he loosened the knot from her neck. Out beyond the haze of morning mist, he caught sight of fresh hoofprints and a fading cloud of dust. Someone had just left this place. And in his mind, a single question flashed. Who had done this? And why? "I am truly grateful for the chance to serve you tonight. Tell me, where are you listening from? I wish you nothing but peace and happiness, wherever in the world you are hearing this story." Boone Carter placed 2 fingers against the girl's neck. The pulse was faint, but it was there. Without hesitation, he pulled off his leather coat, wrapped it around her shoulders, and lifted her into his arms. She was feather-light, her tangled black hair smelling faintly of smoke and desert dust. He shoved open the door of the nearest building, an old saloon with a broken sign, and laid her gently on a dust-covered table. In the dim light slipping through the cracks, Boone got a better look. She couldn't be more than 20. High cheekbones, a deep red bruise circling her neck, and on her left wrist, a torn gash that looked like she'd been bound for hours. She let out a weak moan as Boone loosened the rope. "My name's Boone Carter," he said softly, unsure if she could hear. "I don't know who you are, but it's clear someone wanted you dead." Boone was not the kind of man who went looking for trouble. For over a decade, he'd lived alone out on the prairie plowing fields, herding cattle, minding his own business. Buying the ghost town of Red Hollow for $50 had been a straightforward deal. A few old buildings, a well, a horse corral enough to make a decent way station for his herd. But now, staring at the pale face of this Apache girl, he knew every plan he had just went out the window. A faint rustle made him glance over. Something bulky was tied to the girl's hip in a cloth pouch. Boone opened it and found an old piece of buckskin parchment, neatly folded, edges scorched. Crude markings formed a map, with a wolf's head symbol at a narrow canyon. He knew that place, Wolf's Head Pass, about a day's ride from here, his brow furrowed. Why would an Apache girl be hanged in the town square? And what did this map have to do with it? The sound of horses echoed in from the canyon walls. Boone stepped to the doorway, squinting into the sun. On the eastern trail, 5 riders were approaching, red dust boiling up under their hooves. Their saddles were military issue, and sunlight flashed off rifle barrels at their sides. Boone's jaw tightened. Whoever had left her hanging here, they were coming back. And he knew if they found her alive, neither of them would be leaving Red Hollow in one piece. He turned back inside, dropped the bar across the door, and leaned down close to her. "If you can hear me, you need to wake up right now. We've got company, and they're not here to talk." Boone shoved the heavy table against the door, then reached for the Winchester resting on the rack behind the bar. He broke the lever, checked the chamber. 5 rounds left. Not much, but enough to make the men outside think twice before stepping in. Hoofbeats stopped right in front of the saloon. Through the narrow crack in the door, Boone saw a tall, lean man dismount, first ex-military by the look of him, wearing a faded gray coat. Under the wide brim of his hat, his narrow eyes sliced across the square like a knife. 2 others stayed mounted, their hands loose but their trigger fingers resting dangerously close to their rifles. "Carter," the tall man called out, as if he'd known Boone's name all along. Heard you just bought this place from the county. Congratulations. But I think you picked up something that doesn't belong to you. Boone leaned against the doorframe, voice even. If you're talking about the Apache girl hanging out there, I cut her down. Far as I'm concerned, everything in here is mine now. A short silence. Then the tall man gave a dry, sand-rough laugh. Name's Calder. My associates and I are looking for an item, something the girl has in her possession. Hand her over, and everyone walks away peaceful. You mean that map to Wolf's Head Pass, right? Boone said, face unreadable. Calder's eyes narrowed slightly, one corner of his mouth curling. So you've seen it. Good saves me from having to explain. Behind him, Boone heard a faint breath. The Apache girl was awake now, her eyes wide, breathing quick. Boone turned to her and murmured, "They want your map." Her voice came hoarse, urgent. "You can't let them have it. Wolf's Head Pass. That's where they've hidden the gunpowder stash. If they use it, my whole tribe will be wiped out." Boone's grip on the rifle tightened. That was all he needed to hear. Outside, Calder began to count. "I'll give you to the count of 3. If the door's not open, we're coming in. 1, 2. Boone lowered the Winchester into his shooting hand and looked at her Nayeli. "If this goes bad, run out the back, take the west alley. Don't look back. 3. Gravel exploded as Calder's boot slammed into the door. Boone squeezed the trigger. The rifle's roar cracked through the dead silence of the ghost town, splintering wood and knocking the intruder backward. Horses shrieked, dust boiling in the air. In that split second of chaos, Boone shouted, "Go now." Nayeli bolted for the rear, but from the corner of the street, 2 more mounted riders appeared, cutting off the escape. Boone realized this wasn't just 5 men, like he'd thought. They had surrounded Red Hollow long before he'd cut her down. Bullets ripped through the air, slamming into the old wooden wall and sending splinters flying. Boone pressed his back against it, the Winchester snug against his shoulder. At the rear door, Nayeli froze as 2 mounted gunmen blocked the way out, revolvers glinting in their hands. "Inside!" Boone barked, firing a round at the nearest man. The shot sent the horse rearing, throwing its rider hard to the dirt. The second man yanked his reins, just in time to dodge the next bullet. Boone grabbed Nayeli's arm and pulled her through a narrow door leading down into the old wine cellar. Light from the cracks above was barely enough to outline the rotting barrels, the musty smell of spoiled liquor heavy in the air. He slammed the door shut and dropped the iron bar into place. "They'll find us," Nayeli whispered, her voice still hoarse. "If we don't get out of town now, they'll take the map, and my people will die." Boone leaned against a barrel, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Tell me why what's in Wolf's Head Pass matters so much." Nayeli locked eyes with him sharp, steady. "It's the Army's gunpowder stockpile. They plan to use it to wipe out our camp. I've been tracking them for months to find it. I thought I could get the news back in time, but..." She swallowed hard. "They caught me on the way." Boone nodded slowly, piecing it together. If she was telling the truth, what she carried wasn't just a scrap of hide, it was the lives of hundreds. Heavy footsteps thudded above, then a rough voice called out, "They're down here, bring the lamp." Boone motioned for silence. He dug into his coat, pulled out his Bowie knife, and handed it to her. "If I don't make it, you'll have to fend for yourself." Nayeli gave a faint, sad smile. "I've been fending for myself my whole life, Carter. But today, I think we'll do it together." The hatch burst open, lamplight spilling down with a chorus of shouts. Boone fired twice, the metallic crack echoing in the cramped space. One man tumbled down the steps, lifeless. The other retreated fast, but his cries for reinforcements rang through the street. "We don't have long," Boone said. "We've got to move before they tighten the noose." He led Nayeli into a narrow side tunnel that opened behind the livery stable, a route he'd once thought useful for moving cattle, now saving both their lives. The smell of hay and road dust hit their noses as they burst into the open. They rode hard out of town, the shouts and pounding hooves chasing them into the open country. In the thunder of galloping horses, Boone glanced over at Nayeli. Her eyes no longer held fear, only determination. And he knew, from the moment he'd cut her down, his fate was bound to this Apache girl. "I'm grateful you're here." If this story stirred up memories of the old days of dusty afternoons and hoofbeats echoing in your chest, subscribe to my channel. so every day we can sit together again. And I'll tell you another tale of the Wild West. The narrow trail out of Red Hollow was barely wide enough for a single horse. Sheer cliffs rose on both sides, amplifying the pounding of hooves and the heavy, rapid breathing until it echoed like war drums. Boone glanced over his shoulder. Red dust billowed behind them, and at least 6 riders were closing in fast. "They've got more men," Nayeli shouted, struggling to control the wiry black horse beneath her. Boone signaled toward a narrow cleft in the rock to the right. They darted in, loose stones clattering down from above. The passage was so tight that only one rider could pass at a time, forcing the pursuers to string out and lose their advantage in numbers. Boone halted at a bend, rifle raised. His first shot shattered a chunk of stone in front of the lead rider, sending the man's horse rearing. But Calder wasn't one to give up easily. His voice rang out from the rear. "Carter! You don't know who you're standing against. Hand over the girl and the map, and you walk away alive." Boone shouted back, his voice as sharp as a blade. "I know enough to see what you'll do with that gunpowder stash, and I'm not selling my life to buy your silence." A sharp whistle cut the air. Instantly, 2 riders broke away, climbing a side path along the cliff face, aiming to cut them off ahead. Boone saw the move and spurred his horse forward. They burst into an open stretch of land, a mistake. The dry, cracked field stretched in every direction with no cover. From the north, 3 more riders appeared, fanning out to block the way. Nayeli reined in, scanning the ground for an escape. "They're closing the circle," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. Boone's eyes locked westward toward a sagging wooden fence that led to an abandoned cattle pen. "With me." He drove his horse on, firing back to keep the pursuers at bay. They smashed through the fence in a cloud of dust and splinters, but as they reached the pen, Boone saw Calder already there, hand resting lightly on his colt, smile cold as a winter dawn. Behind him, 4 more gunmen spread out, sealing every way out. "End of the trail, Carter," Calder said, stepping forward. "The girl's run long enough. Hand her over with the map, and you leave here in one piece." Nayeli tightened her grip on the reins, eyes locked on Calder. "If they get that gunpowder, hundreds of Apache will die. You know that, Carter." Boone felt a cold sweat beat along his neck. 6 barrels were leveled straight at them. Behind, only rotting wood and an open, empty field. The odds of escape were nearly 0. He drew in a slow breath, eyes fixed on Calder. "If you want her," Boone said evenly, "you'll have to step over my dead body." The metallic click of hammers being drawn back filled the air. The tension was thick enough to choke on one wrong move, and it would explode. The silence stretched on like centuries. Every breath from the horses, every hiss of wind through the warped boards, seemed unnervingly loud. Boone knew the instant he or Calder pulled the trigger, the pen would erupt into chaos, blood and smoke everywhere. Calder narrowed his eyes, his voice low and steady. "You're a smart cowhand, Carter. Don't make yourself a dead hero. We just want the map. Hand it over, and the girl with you will get a quick end." "A quick end?" Boone's voice cut like gravel. "I've seen your kind of quick. Hanging a girl for sport?" A flicker of darkness passed through Calder's gaze. He stepped forward, and instantly Boone heard the collective click of 6 hammers being drawn back. Nayeli leaned just enough for Boone to hear her whisper. "This stable? There's a tunnel heading north. I saw it when they kept me here." "You sure?" Boone asked without taking his eyes off Calder. "Sure, but it'll be loud and they'll shoot." Calder spoke again, mockery curling in his tone. "What's running through that head of yours, Carter? Gonna use that rotting wood behind you for cover?" Boone smirked. "Number, I'm going to use it for your funeral." Before the words had cooled, he fired his bullet, striking a beam, sparks leaping into the dry hay stacked against the wall. Flames roared to life, black smoke billowing upward. Horses screamed, mercenaries flinched, a few jerking their reins back in panic. Boone seized Nayeli's hand, pulling her inside. The fire and smoke blinded their pursuers, but the heat bit at their skin. He kicked through a rotting plank, revealing a deep earthen shaft shored up with timber, the old stableman's escape tunnel. "Go," Boone urged. Nayeli slid down first, Boone following and dragging the board shut behind him. Above, shouts and coughing rang out as Calder's men tried to push through the smoke. In the dark, Boone and Nayeli crawled fast, their breaths ragged, heartbeats pounding louder than the chaos overhead. After nearly 10 yards, a dim glow appeared ahead. They emerged through a crack in the hillside, cool wind slapping their faces. Boone looked west and saw the trail that led toward the mountain's base. If they could cross it, they might reach Wolf's Head Pass before Calder. But as he swung into the saddle, a rifle cracked in the distance. The bullet thunked into a tree trunk inches from his head. On the ridge to the north, one of Calder's sharpshooters was already chambering another round. Boone kicked his horse down the slope, Nayeli riding tight behind. Hoofbeats thundered from the rear. Calder had seen through their ruse and was unleashing every man he had. Boone and Nayeli tore down the sandy slope, hooves kicking up rocks and dust, the scorching heat of the grit hitting their faces. Ahead lay a narrow valley leading into the jagged stone formation shaped like a wolf's Head Pass. Behind them, Calder's shout echoed, each beat of his voice closing the gap. "They'll reach us before we can torch the stash," Nayeli yelled over her shoulder, her words ripped apart by the wind. "Not if I keep them busy," Boone shot back, yanking his rifle from its scabbard. They burst through the gap, and the sight made Boone's jaw clench. Wedged between two sheer rock walls stood a military canvas tent, surrounded by dozens of wooden crates marked with the stamp, U.S. Army. Every crate was clearly labeled gunpowder, enough to wipe out an entire Apache camp. Boone dismounted just as Nayeli dropped to her knees, pulling a kerosene bottle from her satchel. "You hold them off. I'll get it ready." Before he could answer, the pounding of hooves filled the pass's entrance. Calder rode in at the front, revolver glinting, hatred blazing in his eyes. "Carter," he roared, "step away from those crates and drop the rifle if you want to live." Boone stood in the narrow path, rifle level across his chest. "If I die, you die. One bullet into this pile, and the whole pass becomes a graveyard." Calder hesitated, weighing the risk. His men began to fan out for better angles. But then, from the high ridges above, a sharp series of whistles cut through the air. From the stone edges, over a dozen Apache warriors emerged, bows and rifles aimed downward. At their head stood a broad-shouldered man with eyes sharp as flint, Nayeli's brother. "Lay down your weapons, Calder," his deep voice rang out. "You're on our land." A shadow of fear passed across Calder's face, but he forced a sneer. "You won't fire into the powder. One spark, and you all die." Nayeli stepped out from behind Boone, holding a cloth-wrapped torch soaked in oil. "Then try me," she said, her voice cold as steel. Silence tightened like a noose. Then, outnumbered from the front and above, Calder signaled his men to lower their guns. Boone wasted no time. He nodded for Nayeli to set the torch to the outer crates. Flames caught quickly, the crackle of burning wood filling the pass. "Clear the canyon," Boone shouted. Apache warriors, Boone, and Nayeli all spurred their horses and raced from the gap. Behind them, a deafening explosion split the sky. The ground shook beneath their hooves, and a black column of smoke rose like a signal to the heavens. The powder stockpile and the massacre it was meant for was gone in an instant. Smoke from the blast still curled upward, painting the sunset sky a deep blood red. The wind carried the bitter scent of burnt powder and ash, wrapping around Wolf's Head Pass like a warning that this place had already swallowed too much blood. Boone tied his horse beneath the shade of an old birch by the creek. Nayeli knelt at the water's edge, splashing her face with the cool stream, her hands trembling not from fear, but from how quickly it had all ended. "What will you do next?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the water. Boone watched the black flecks of ash drift away downstream. "I bought that town thinking I needed a place to hide from the past. Turns out, that place needed me to bury a different past." Nayeli looked up, the last light of the day spilling through her hair in a faint halo. "You could leave, or you could stay. My people would accept you." Boone gave a faint, wry smile. "I've never been good at living with anyone, but maybe it's time I learned." Hoofbeats sounded softly behind them. It was Nayeli's brother, his face stern but his eyes no longer distant. He reined in, giving Boone a small nod. "Today, you saved an entire village. To us, you're no longer an outsider." No one spoke after that. In this land, the most important words were often the ones left unsaid. Night settled in. From a distance, the Apache campfires began to flicker, blending with the low hum of drums and voices. Boone sat beside the fire, a tin cup of strong black coffee warming his hands. the flames reflecting in his steel-gray eyes. Naili sat across from him, wrapped tight in a blanket, occasionally glancing up to meet his gaze. "There's one thing," Boone said quietly, as if speaking only to the fire. "I'll never forget the sight of you hanging at that town gate, and I'll make sure it never happens to anyone here." Nayeli didn't answer, just gave a small nod. In the firelight, her eyes held something warmth and resolve in equal measure. In the Wild West, peace was always as fragile as a noose rope. But that night, with the drums in the distance and the smell of wood smoke in the air, Boone Carter knew he had found a reason to stay. Out here, you can buy land with money, but trust and respect, you pay for with your life. I once thought all I needed was a place to hide from the past, but the truth is, what a man really searches for is a place worth staying in, a reason to fight and never turn away. And sometimes, that reason comes in a form you never expected. Once again, it's truly an honor to share this story with you. Tell me what you think, leave a comment below. Press 1 if you enjoyed this story. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping tales from the Wild West.